On a frozen night along New York's Fifth Avenue, a pregnant young wife falls down a marble staircase, not by accident, but at the hands of the man who vowed to protect her. While society believes she has vanished to recover by the sea, her broken body is secretly carried into the home of a reclusive magnate, and there, between shadows and whispers, danger and forbidden tenderness begin to collide. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and answer this. What do you love most about historical romances? The drama, the costumes, or the secrets hidden behind perfect manners? New York City, in the heart of the Gilded Age of 1884, lay wrapped in a bitter winter night. Snow pressed against the tall windows of the Whitford mansion on Fifth Avenue, muting the distant sound of carriage wheels and leaving the world outside shrouded in a pale, icy stillness. Inside, however, the air vibrated with tension so sharp it seemed to crackle along the silk-covered walls. Mary Ellen Whitford stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, one hand resting protectively over her abdomen, the other gripping the polished banister to steady herself. The soft glow of gas sconces illuminated her delicate features, casting fragile shadows that accentuated the exhaustion etched across her face. Her dark chestnut hair had loosened from its meticulously arranged chignon, letting several silken strands fall against her cheeks like mute witnesses to her distress. Charles Whitford loomed before her, tall and immaculately dressed in a deep navy tailcoat that reflected his taste for authority rather than elegance. His ice-blue eyes blazed with a fury he barely attempted to disguise. "You dare hide from me?" he hissed, stepping closer. "You dare turn your face away when I speak?" Mary Ellen swallowed hard, willing her voice to remain steady. "I have hidden nothing. I merely asked for quiet." That single word, quiet, seemed to ignite something violent in him. Charles's gloved hand curled into a fist. "You provoke me, Mary Ellen. You always have." He took a step toward her, then another, until he stood so near she could feel the heat of his anger radiating from him. The faint scent of pomade and expensive tobacco clung to him, but it only deepened the chill creeping up her spine. "I will not argue tonight," she whispered. "Please, Charles, I am unwell." He scoffed. "Unwell? You give excuses like a child." Her heart quickened. Beneath her palm, she felt the fragile promise of life she longed to protect. A quiet tremor ran through her body, and she took a cautious step backward. The heel of her boot touched the edge of the top stair. "Come back here," Charles ordered, his voice rising. "Not tonight," she murmured. Charles lunged. She barely had time to gasp. His hand struck her shoulder with unexpected force, a burst of rage stronger than anything he had unleashed before. Her balance vanished in an instant. The world tilted violently, the banister slid away, light blurred into streaks of gold and shadow. Her body crashed onto the marble steps. One step, then another. Her gown twisted around her legs. Agony exploded along her side, then her head, then everywhere at once. A hoarse cry escaped her lips before darkness swallowed her. The thud of her fall thundered through the cavernous entrance hall, echoing outward through the night like a desperate plea. Charles froze at the top of the staircase, breath emerging in sharp clouds. He stared down at her crumpled form, one hand trembling at the enormity of what he had done. But fear did not soften him. Slowly, calculation replaced panic. He stepped back from the railing, retreating into the shadows like a man erasing his own presence. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of Mary Ellen's fall across the neighboring terrace of the Burnham residence. Elias Burnham, alone in his study, lifted his head sharply. The sound had been unmistakable, not the clatter of dropped wood, nor the slip of a servant's hand. It was something heavier, softer, human, and it struck him with a force that stirred old memories he wished would remain buried. He crossed the room in long strides, opened the French doors that led to the terrace, and peered toward the Whitford mansion. A dim lamp glowed behind the frosted windows, revealing the faint outline of a figure sprawled below the staircase. Without hesitation, Elias descended the terrace steps and entered the side door of the Whitford home, guided by instinct rather than invitation. The mansion was eerily silent. The ornate carpets muffled his steps as he moved deeper into the hall. Then he saw her. Mary Ellen lay motionless at the foot of the marble staircase, her dark hair fanned out across the cold stone like a halo undone. Her skin, normally fair as ivory, had taken on a pale, almost translucent cast. Blood trickled from a cut near her temple, staining the lace at her collar. Her hands remained curled protectively near her abdomen. Elias felt something inside his chest clench. "Mrs. Whitford," he murmured, lowering himself beside her. He placed 2 fingers gently against her neck. A flutter of pulse responded. Weak, fragile, but present. He exhaled slowly, a breath filled with both relief and dread. He lifted his gaze up the staircase. No one was there, no servant rushing in terror, no husband calling for help. Only silence, thick, guilty, suffocating. Elias gathered Mary Ellen carefully into his arms. Her head fell lightly against his shoulder, and for the briefest moment he felt the warmth of her breath against his throat, a whisper of life, begging not to be abandoned. He carried her across the snow-dusted terrace, shielding her from the icy wind as he brought her into his own home. Gas lamps cast a warm glow over the mahogany hall as he called for Mrs. Halston with a voice he had not used in years, urgent, commanding, fearful. "Fetch Dr. Warren," he said. "Now." "Mrs." Halston's eyes widened, but she obeyed without question. The loyalty of Elias's staff lay not in fear, but in respect, earned over years of quiet integrity. Elias carried Mary Ellen into the nearest guest chamber, its walls lined with tapestries in deep burgundy tones that seemed to absorb the weight of tragedy entering the space. He laid her gently upon the bed and knelt beside her, removing his coat and placing it around her trembling form. "Stay with me," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Do not fade." In the mansion next door, Charles Whitford stood before his parlour mirror, smoothing his tailored waistcoat and rehearsing the lie he intended to tell. By morning, he would inform the few who dared ask that his wife had left for Newport due to a sudden illness. He would forge letters. He would appear concerned. He would seize control of the narrative before the truth could crawl free of the shadows. But for that single night, for that single fragile moment, Mary Ellen was beyond his reach, and the man who carried her away, with shoulders broad enough to bear both grief and responsibility, would soon discover that her fall had awakened a part of him he believed had died long ago. The snow continued to fall over Fifth Avenue, soft and relentless, as if trying to hush the secrets that had been set loose in the darkness. The Burnham mansion, standing silent and withdrawn behind its iron gates on Fifth Avenue, had long been known among the elite as a place where time moved more slowly. Its tall windows were usually dim, its rooms quiet, its master a ghostly presence who seldom appeared in society. Yet on that winter night of 1884, the house stirred with life, the urgent, trembling kind that arrives uninvited and alters the air forever. Mary Ellen lay upon the guest chamber bed, her breathing faint, her skin pale as snow. The lamplight flickered softly over her features, revealing the delicate curve of her cheek, the small tremor in her eyelids, the faintest whisper of pain crossing her lips. Elias Burnham stood near the foot of the bed, his tall frame tense, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity he tried to disguise beneath a veneer of composure. The sight of her, so fragile, so still, woke corridors of memory he had spent years locking away. Dr. Nathaniel Warren arrived quickly, snow still clinging to the hem of his coat and settling upon his salt and pepper beard. Mrs. Agnes Halston showed him to the chamber with haste, her kind eyes filled with the unspoken worry that had settled over the household. "She has suffered a terrible fall," Elias murmured, as the doctor set down his black leather bag beside the bed. And she is with child. Dr. Warren's expression grew solemn. Then we must proceed with the utmost care. Mary Ellen stirred faintly at the sound of unfamiliar voices, but the doctor waited until her breathing steadied before beginning his examination. Elias stepped back, giving space, yet every restrained breath betrayed his vigilance. The doctor worked with calm skill, his hands sure, his brow furrowed. He asked for warm water, cloths, bandages. Samuel Carter fetched each item swiftly, never looking directly at the unconscious woman out of respect. Mrs. Holston lingered in the doorway, prayer whispering behind her eyes. At last, after what felt like hours suspended in a fragile silence, Dr. Warren straightened. "She is alive," he said quietly, "and the child still clings to life. But the risk is grave. She must remain still. No shocks, no distress." Elias nodded, but a cold tension settled beneath his ribs. His gaze drifted again to Mary Ellen's still form, her breathing shallow, her lashes trembling. "Will she wake soon?" he asked. "In time," Dr. Warren replied. "She suffered trauma to her head. The body must choose its moment to return." The doctor packed his instruments, but lingered beside the bed, adjusting the blankets with a tenderness that softened his professional distance. Then he turned to Elias with a quieter, more solemn question. "Who did this to her?" Elias's jaw tightened. For a moment he did not speak, but the truth, heavy and dark, hovered between them. "She cannot return to her husband," he said finally, his voice low, edged with certainty. "Not now, not ever." Dr. Warren nodded, his eyes filled with understanding and with fear. "Then this house must become a refuge. She must remain unseen." Elias agreed. He followed the doctor into the hall, closing the chamber door with great care, as though the slightest sound might disturb the fragile balance between life and loss. "Absolute confidentiality," he said to Mrs. Holston and Samuel. "Not a whisper beyond these walls. Her life depends on it." Mrs. Holston pressed a hand to her chest. "You have my word, sir." Samuel bowed his head. "Mine as well." Didu, the loyalty of these two, forged over years of shared grief and quiet resilience, reassured Elias in a way he had not expected. Yet a shadow crossed his thoughts. Charles Whitford's reach extended far, and the man's obsession with appearances made him dangerous. While the doctor prepared a small dose of laudanum to ease Mary Ellen's pain when she awoke, Elias walked to the tall windows overlooking the terrace. Snow coated the stone balustrades, softening the world beyond into a cold, muted haze. In the distance, gas lamps glowed along the avenue, their flames wavering in the wind. He closed his eyes. For one fleeting moment, he allowed the old memories to surface, the sound of his wife's laughter, the warmth of a tiny hand curled around his finger, the shattering silence that followed their loss. Pain pressed at his chest, sharp and familiar. And yet, looking back toward the chamber where Mary Ellen lay, he felt something stir beneath the grief. Not hope, not yet, but the faint beginning of purpose, like the first flicker of light behind heavy curtains. Hours passed. Dr. Warren eventually departed, promising to return at dawn. Mrs. Holston prepared broth, though Mary Ellen remained unable to take anything. Samuel checked every door and gate, ensuring that not even a stray glance from the street could betray the fragile life hidden inside the Burnham mansion. Elias stayed near the chamber, pacing the hall, listening for any change in her breathing. He told himself his vigilance stemmed from responsibility alone, nothing more. She was a neighbor in danger, a woman abandoned in her hour of need. Protecting her was simply the right thing to do, but deep within, he knew it was not so simple. When the first signs of dawn crept through the curtains, tinging the room with pale light, Mary Ellen's fingers twitched. Her lashes trembled. A faint sound escaped her lips, barely a breath, but enough to send Elias immediately to her side. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then darting around the room in frightened confusion. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice little more than a whimper. Elias lowered himself to her level, keeping his voice gentle. "You are safe, Mrs. Whitford," he murmured. "You are in my home. You suffered a fall, and I brought you here." Her pupils widened, fear flickering like a trapped flame. Her hand moved instinctively toward her abdomen, and the terror in her eyes tightened something deep inside Elias's chest. "The doctor has seen to you," he added softly. "Your child is still fighting. So must you." At that, Mary Ellen's eyes filled with tears. Not the kind born of weakness, but the kind that spring from deep, aching sorrow, the kind a woman sheds only when the truth threatens to break her. She blinked rapidly, as though ashamed to let him see her vulnerability. Elias hesitated, then offered his hand, palm facing upward, giving her the choice. She stared at it for a long moment, breath trembling, then placed her fingers lightly against his. The brief contact sent a subtle warmth through the cold edges of his solitude. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" He swallowed. "Because no one else did." She closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking into her bones like a truth she wished she could deny. She tried once more to sit up, but pain forced her back against the pillows. "Do not move," Elias cautioned gently. "Your body has endured too much." Mary Ellen looked around the room. The heavy velvet curtains, the carved mahogany furniture, the warm glow of the fireplace. A strange mixture of safety and dread washed over her. "My husband," she began. "You are hidden from him," Elias assured her, "and for now he believes you have gone away to recover by the sea." Her lips parted in confusion. "He told them that?" "Yes. He is weaving his own story. Forged letters, I suspect. But his lies will hold only so long." Her eyes darkened with a knowledge he could not yet grasp. She turned her face slightly away, as though unable to bear the weight of her own thoughts. Elias rose from his chair, but he did not step far. He stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back straight as steel. His silhouette was outlined by the faint winter light, giving him an air of solemn vigilance. "You may rest here," he said, "for as long as necessary." She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and bewilderment. "I do not wish to be a burden." "You are not." His voice was soft, but the conviction in it was unmistakable. A trembling silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind brushing against the stone walls. Mary Ellen watched him, unable to decipher the complexity of the man before her. The reclusive industrialist with sorrow woven into every line of his posture, the unexpected savior who had carried her out of the shadows. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile yet sincere. Elias inclined his head slightly. "Rest now. Strength will return with time." As Mary Ellen drifted back into a fragile doze, Elias stepped into the hall, where Mrs. Halston waited with concern etched into her features. "She woke?" the housekeeper asked. "Yes." "Did she remember everything?" "She remembered enough." Mrs. Halston nodded slowly. "Poor soul." Elias said nothing. He looked toward the window at the end of the corridor. The sky beyond it had turned the soft pink of early morning, snow still falling in silent, endless sheets. The city would soon come alive with gossip and polite lies, but inside this house a different truth had taken root, a truth fraught with danger, grief, and something far more tender than Elias wished to admit. He turned back toward the chamber, drawn by the quiet rhythm of Mary Ellen's breathing, steady now, fragile, but present. Something deep within him shifted, an almost imperceptible change, but undeniable. The house, once a sanctuary of solitude, now held a new heartbeat. And Elias Burnham, who had spent years cloaked in shadows, found himself standing guard over a life he was determined not to lose. Morning light crept slowly over Fifth Avenue, pale and uncertain, as though hesitant to touch a world steeped in secrets. The winter cold had deepened, leaving a thin layer of frost along the wrought-iron fences that lined the grand mansions. Beneath this elegant facade, tension simmered, quiet, coiled, waiting. Within the Whitford mansion, Charles Whitford sat alone in his study, tapping the end of his pen against the polished walnut desk. A stack of freshly written letters lay before him, each addressed to a different acquaintance, and each written in a feminine, delicate hand he had forged with unsettling skill. He read the last one again, lips curling in irritation. "My dearest friend, the sea air has begun to restore my strength." He exhaled sharply. It was clever, too clever. For a brief moment, pride flickered, followed by something darker. The lie was beginning to fray at the edges. He could sense it in the glances cast his way at dinners and social gatherings, in the whispers that followed him through the ornate halls of salons and parlours. Astute socialites, especially those with a penchant for gossip, were not satisfied with the narrative he had woven. Lucille Davenport, in particular, had already begun asking questions. She had approached him earlier that morning outside Trinity Church, her emerald green bustle gown dramatically sweeping across the steps as she intercepted him. Her red hair had been styled high in a pompadour, glinting like fire beneath the muted winter sun. "How fortunate that Mary Ellen is improving," she had said sweetly. "But tell me, Charles, why did she leave so suddenly? Without a companion? Without a single visit from a friend?" Her smile had been polite. Her eyes had not. The memory of her probing tone lingered like smoke as Charles sealed the last forged letter. He rose from his chair and paced to the window, staring at the frost-dusted street below. Winter's silence should have comforted him, but instead it left him feeling watched, judged. His wife's absence, what he insisted was a temporary retreat to Newport, no longer rested as firmly on society's shoulders as he hoped, and he was losing patience. Across the avenue, in the quieter, shadowed rooms of the Burnham mansion, Mary Ellen lay propped against soft pillows, her breath faint but stable. The bruises along her arm had begun to shift from purple to yellow, dark reminders that made her flinch when her fingers brushed them. Her tea gown, a pale shade of lilac, draped loosely over her slender frame. The fabric brushed her skin like a whisper, gentle, unlike the world she had fled. The room was warm, thanks to the crackling fire in the hearth. The patterned rug beneath the bed muted every sound, creating an atmosphere both peaceful and unnervingly quiet. Mary Ellen's gaze travelled across the chamber, taking in details she had been too weak to observe before. The carved mahogany wardrobe, the lace curtains heavy with dusted embroidery, the silver tray of untouched broth on the bedside table, and the chair beside her bed, empty now, but still bearing the faint indentation from when Elias Burnham had sat there through the night. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she whispered, her voice fragile. Mrs. Halston entered carrying a small porcelain cup. Though her expression was carefully composed, worry flickered in her eyes. "Dr. Warren will arrive later this morning," she said gently. "For now, he left this tea to ease your discomfort." Mary Ellen accepted the cup with trembling hands. As she sipped the warm liquid, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. Mrs. Halston hesitated. "Are you in much pain today?" "A little," Mary Ellen admitted. Then she lowered her gaze. "But I am safe here." The housekeeper nodded, pressing a reassuring hand to her shoulder before slipping out of the room. Left alone, Mary Ellen drew a slow breath. She had awakened in this room twice now, each time with the faint awareness that she inhabited a fragile space between fear and sanctuary. Her fingers found the faint swell of her abdomen, barely perceptible beneath the soft fabric. A spark of hope mingled with dread. A soft sound at the doorway made her look up. Elias stood there, hesitating as though unsure he belonged inside the warm light spilling from the chamber. He wore a simple waistcoat and rolled-up shirt sleeves, an informal attire unusual for a man of his station. The faint silver strands at his temples caught the early light, giving him a solemn, almost heroic presence. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, his voice low, as if afraid to disturb the delicate air around her. She set the cup aside. "Better, I think, but still unsteady." Elias stepped closer, moving with a caution that tugged at her heart. Dr. Warren said it will take time. Healing often arrives quietly, long before we recognize it. His words pierced something deep inside her. For a moment she simply watched him, feeling the simmering tension between them, a tenderness blooming where it should not, a safety she hardly dared to trust. "Elias," she whispered, her voice catching. He looked at her with gentle intensity. "Yes? I need to tell you something." He pulled the chair closer and sat, folding his hands together. "You owe me nothing," he said softly. But Mary Ellen shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "I cannot remain silent anymore." She drew a breath that shivered through her. Her eyes lifted to his, hazel meeting grey, two wounded souls suspended in the hush of a room that had seen too much pain. "My marriage was not what it appeared," she finally said, each word trembling. "Charles, he was not the man society believed him to be." Elias's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he remained silent, giving her space. "He controlled every part of my life," she continued. "What I wore, whom I saw, what I said. He made the house feel like a prison lined with silk and filled with silence. Every day I told myself things might change, that I simply had to try harder, be gentler, but nothing softened him, nothing reached him." A tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, ashamed to reveal such weakness. Elias leaned forward slightly. "You endured more than any person should," she swallowed. "When I learned I was with child, I thought perhaps he would change, for the child's sake, for our future." "And did he?" Elias asked quietly. Mary Ellen shook her head. "No, he grew worse, angry that I had not told him sooner, suspicious, possessive." She closed her eyes, recalling the night of the fall, the icy rage in Charles's voice, the sensation of her world tilting into darkness. Elias's hand tightened around the armrest, his knuckles whitening. It took all his restraint not to reach for her, to offer some tangible comfort, but he feared that any touch, no matter how gentle, might overwhelm her in this delicate moment. She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. "I do not know why you came to my home that night, Elias. I do not know what guided you to me, but I owe you my life." "No," he said, voice low but firm. "You owe me nothing. I simply did what anyone with a conscience would have done." She looked at him with disbelief. "Not everyone would have risked stepping into my husband's home. Not everyone would have carried me here without hesitation. Not everyone would have given me refuge." The unspoken emotion in her words lingered between them, thick and electric. Elias exhaled slowly. "I heard something, a sound I could not ignore. It reminded me of—" He paused, pain flashing briefly through his expression. "It reminded me of a night I could not save someone I loved." Mary Ellen's breath caught. "Your wife," she whispered. He closed his eyes in a brief surrender. "Yes." A silence settled between them, profound and tender. It was not uncomfortable. It was weighty, filled with shared fragility, as though two broken worlds had gently overlapped. After a moment, Elias forced himself to stand. "You need rest. I will be nearby if you require anything." He stepped back toward the door, but before he could leave, she spoke again. "Elias." He turned. "Thank you for everything." His gaze softened in a way she had never witnessed before. "It is an honor to keep you safe." He left quietly, closing the door with care. Mary Ellen lay back against the pillows, her heart beating faster than before. Elias's presence lingered in the air like a warm imprint, both comforting and disquieting. Meanwhile, across Fifth Avenue, the world grew darker by the hour. Charles Whitford, restless and increasingly suspicious, had summoned two men to meet him in a dimly lit parlor. Their faces were harsh, their eyes sharp with opportunistic hunger. "You will watch the block," Charles said, voice cold. "Every night. I want to know who enters and who leaves each residence, particularly Burnham's home." The older of the two nodded. "Yes, sir. And if you see anything unusual," Charles continued, "you will report it to me immediately." Over the next few days they observed the quiet movements around the Burnham mansion. Not much occurred. Only the consistent, disciplined rotations of servants, deliveries, and Mrs. Halston's unassuming errands. Until one afternoon they spotted a veiled figure slipping into the service entrance, escorted by Samuel Carter. The woman wore a thick shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her face obscured. They caught only the faint outline of her build and her cautious steps. The shorter man squinted. "She looks like Mrs. Whitford." "Could be." The elder smirked. "Careful. Women of society are all the same shape in these heavy gowns." "Maybe, but there's something familiar." They lingered a moment longer before slipping back into the shadows, their suspicions deepening. Inside the Burnham home, Mary Ellen remained unaware of the eyes watching from afar, yet she could not deny the growing weight on her chest, intuition whispering of danger drawing nearer like footsteps muffled by snow. As she leaned her head back against the pillow, she felt the faint flutter of life beneath her hand, a fragile spark, a silent promise. And beyond the closed door, Elias Burnham stood in the hallway, wrestling with a truth he refused to name. He was beginning to care more than he should, more than he dared, more than he understood. The prison of silk and silence Mary Ellen had escaped was beginning to unravel. But outside, a different trap was quietly setting its snare. The winter sun lingered low over Fifth Avenue, its pale gold rays filtering through layers of frost that clung to the grand facades of the city's finest mansions. Daylight did little to thaw the bitter air, nor did it quiet the murmurs drifting through the parlors and sitting rooms of New York's elite. Beneath their polished elegance, a storm of curiosity, suspicion, and vanity was taking shape. Inside the Burnham mansion, however, time moved with a gentler rhythm. Days had passed since Mary Ellen first awakened beneath Elias's roof, each one weaving another fragile thread of trust between them. Her strength returned slowly, like a hesitant blossom emerging in winter, and with it came the delicate rediscovery of moments she had long been denied, moments of choice, of silence, of kindness. That morning she sat near the window of a small sitting room Elias had opened to her. It faced the garden, its hedges still buried under snow, but the sunlight slipping across the room felt warm. She wore a loose tea gown of soft cream, the fabric flowing gently over her frame, unburdened by corset or rigid seams. Her hair, still too tender for elaborate arrangements, fell in a simple twist at the nape of her neck, with a few escaped strands brushing her cheek. She lifted her hand to touch them, wondering when she had last been allowed to look so unadorned, so unguarded. A soft knock sounded, and the door opened just enough for Elias to appear. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said, voice quiet, almost hesitant. Mary Ellen shook her head. "Not at all." He stepped inside, carrying a book bound in dark blue leather. The edges were worn, the spine slightly cracked, signs of a volume well loved. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said, offering it to her. "It belonged to my wife. She adored poetry." Mary Ellen's breath caught. She accepted the book with care, as though it were made of glass, and her fingers brushed his for a fleeting moment, just a whisper of contact, yet warm enough to stir the air between them. "I am honored," she whispered. Elias nodded, though something in his eyes flickered, a shadow of a memory, a ghost passing through him. "If you prefer another book," he began gently, "I can bring one." "No," she said, holding the volume close. "This is perfect." He exhaled softly. A quiet, soothing presence settled around him, as if her gratitude had eased a tension he seldom acknowledged. "Would you like a tour of another room?" he asked. "Only if you feel strong enough." She smiled faintly. "Yes, I would." He offered his arm, not out of obligation, but with the reverence of a man who feared breaking something precious. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand lightly upon his forearm. Even through layers of fabric, she felt the subtle warmth of him, the firmness of the muscles beneath his coat sleeves. Elias led her down a quiet corridor, the carpets thick and soft underfoot, muffling every step. Gas sconces cast golden light along the walls, illuminating framed sketches, old landscapes, and small mementos of days when laughter had filled this home. He paused before a carved oak door. "This room," he said softly, "is one I have kept closed for a long time. But I would like you to see it." Her heart trembled. "Only if it brings you no pain." He shook his head. "Some memories ache only when forgotten." He pushed the door open slowly. The library beyond was vast and warm, its shelves filled with richly bound books that stretched toward the ceiling. A grand window framed the snow-covered garden outside. A piano sat near the far wall, dusted yet polished, with sheet music still resting on its stand. Mary Ellen stepped inside, breath caught in her throat. "It is beautiful," she murmured. Elias stood a few steps behind her, his gaze fixed not on the room but on her reaction. A reaction filled with awe and quiet tenderness. "This was her sanctuary," he said, his voice soft. "We would read together here at night." She loved the sound the piano made when the snow fell. Mary Ellen turned slowly. "Do you still play?" "Not in many years." She approached the piano, her fingertips grazing the polished surface. "Would you play for me?" Elias inhaled sharply, caught off guard. For a long moment he remained still, as though deciding whether to let the past reawaken. Then he stepped toward her. "If I play," he said, meeting her gaze, "it will be because you are here." Emotion tightened her chest. Elias sat, his tall frame folding elegantly before the keyboard. His fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain yet longing. When he began to play, the melody was soft, hesitant, like a memory returning on trembling legs. The notes filled the room slowly, weaving through the shelves, filling every shadow with light. Mary Ellen closed her eyes, letting the music settle inside her, gentle as a sigh. When she opened them, Elias was watching her, his hands motionless on the keys, the final note fading into the stillness. She felt heat bloom beneath her skin. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome," he replied, his voice roughened by emotion. "It has been a long time since this house heard music." Their gaze held, long enough for something unspoken to pass between them, something neither dared name. Yet while this quiet world embraced them, Fifth Avenue was far from still. Across the avenue, in the Davenport mansion, Lucille Davenport peered from behind velvet curtains, her expression sharp with suspicion. Her sitting room was filled with women draped in Parisian silk, their jeweled fans fluttering like wings as they murmured about the latest whispers. Lucille lifted a gloved hand, silencing them. "I tell you," she declared, "I heard a voice, a woman's voice, coming from the Burnham house and not from the servants' quarters." The ladies gasped in unison. "But Elias Burnham lives like a widower monk," one whispered. Lucille leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Precisely why it is so curious." She described the faint sound she had heard through her open window 2 nights prior, a voice soft yet unmistakably feminine. She described shadows moving behind Burnham's curtains. She described vague movements at the service entrance, a woman wrapped in a shawl. The room hummed with scandal. Meanwhile, Charles Whitford, desperate, volatile, and unraveling beneath the pressure of his own lies, met privately with 2 city officials in a discreet office. The air smelled of ink, damp wood, and corruption. "My wife is unwell," Charles said with false sorrow. "She is prone to illusions, hysterics, instability. Should she flee again, I expect your cooperation in ensuring her safe return." He slipped a pouch of coins across the desk. The officials exchanged glances. "We understand," one replied. "If she surfaces anywhere, unconventional, we will act accordingly." Charles concealed a smile as cold as a blade. When he stepped outside, the wind cut across his face, stabbing through his carefully tailored overcoat. He ignored it, his mind burning with suspicion. Lucille's hints, the behavior of the Burnham servants, the forged letters he had written, everything pressed upon him. He needed control. Back inside the Burnham mansion, Mary Ellen rested in the library's window seat, warmed by the sunlight and the lingering echo of the piano. Elias stood a few feet away, hands folded behind his back, watching her as though committing her presence to memory. A moment passed, a quiet, suspended moment where the world outside seemed impossibly distant. "Elias," she said softly, "why do you trust me enough to show me these parts of your home?" He hesitated, stepping closer until he stood only a breath away. "Because," he murmured, "there is something in your presence, something that awakens the parts of me I thought were gone." Her breath hitched, their eyes held for a heartbeat, then another. Yet even as warmth grew in the quiet corners of this sanctuary, danger sharpened its claws beyond these walls. Fifth Avenue was whispering, speculating, watching. And in the shadows outside the Burnham mansion, the two men Charles had hired lingered with increased vigilance. Each passing day deepened their suspicion. Inside, Mary Ellen and Elias stood in the fragile serenity of the library, unaware that the delicate connection forming between them glowed like a lantern in the dark, bright enough to draw the attention of those who wished to destroy it. Whispers had begun, and soon the walls themselves would not be enough to contain them. The pale light of a winter morning drifted through the tall windows of the Burnham mansion, softening the sharp lines of the furniture and casting long, graceful shadows upon the polished floors. The snow outside continued to fall in gentle sheets, wrapping Fifth Avenue in silence, as though the world itself wished to protect the fragile peace within these walls. Mary Ellen stood near the hearth of the library, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of a map spread across the table. The parchment was filled with detailed sketches, measurements, and notes written in a firm, elegant hand. Her gaze moved slowly over the intricate lines, absorbing each one with growing fascination. She traced a beam design with the tip of her finger, marveling at the precision. "You understand more than you realize," Elias said from behind her. She turned. He stood with his arms folded lightly across his chest, watching her with a quiet expression that held both pride and melancholy. His dark, sable-brown hair was slightly tousled, and the early light caught the faint silver at his temples, giving him an air of distinguished solemnity. "I do not understand much," Mary Ellen replied with a shy smile, "but I can tell these are important to you." He hesitated, as if weighing the decision to speak. Then he moved closer, stopping on the other side of the table. With slow, deliberate care, he placed his hands on the plans. "These were meant to change the skyline of New York," he said. "A cathedral of steel, a structure tall enough to rise above everything else, a promise that the future could be stronger than the past." She listened, captivated not by the project, but by the emotion threading through his voice. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Life," Elias murmured, eyes drifting down. "Life happened." A silence settled between them, not empty, but dense with the weight of unspoken histories. Mary Ellen felt the pull of curiosity, but she knew better than to press. She had lived through her own silence, her own unspeakable truths. Elias picked up a folded letter from the table and handed it to her. The envelope was worn, the ink faded, as though touched by many years and many tears. "This was the last letter my wife ever wrote to me," he said quietly. Mary Ellen held it with reverence. "May I?" "You may read the first line," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She opened the letter just enough to see the delicate handwriting. The words read, "My beloved, the world feels brighter when your hands are near mine." Mary Ellen inhaled slowly, her heart tightening with empathy. She closed the letter and handed it back, her eyes shining with a tenderness she did not dare verbalize. "I am sorry," she murmured. Elias nodded once, accepting the sentiment without retreating behind his usual reserve. He tucked the letter back into a carved wooden box on the table and opened another flap to reveal a tiny silver rattle, its handle engraved with delicate vines. Mary Ellen's breath caught. "Elias," his hand brushed the toy with a gentleness so profound it nearly broke her. "My son," he said, the words hollow yet full. He would have been 5 years old this winter. She pressed her hand over her heart, feeling an ache that mirrored his. They must have been extraordinary, she whispered. They were my world, he replied, and when I lost them, everything else became insignificant. He stepped away, turning toward the large window that overlooked the garden. Snowflakes spun in slow circles outside, drifting like motionless memories in the cold air. Mary Ellen approached him, stopping at a respectful distance. Her voice trembled when she spoke. You carry their memory with dignity. Elias did not turn immediately, but she saw his shoulders lift with a long, deep breath, as though the words had struck somewhere tender, somewhere long hidden. Perhaps, he said, or perhaps I carry it like a man afraid to move forward. She lowered her gaze. We all fear that, in our own ways. He glanced back at her, his grey eyes shimmering with something unguarded. You fear moving forward? She swallowed and nodded. Every day. A long, breathless quiet stretched between them. Then Elias surprised her by reaching out, not to touch her, but to offer a small, leather-bound journal. It was filled with more sketches, more dreams of steel towers, bridges, and impossible heights. These were the plans I created after they passed, he said. I thought perhaps building something enduring would bring me peace, but I could never finish them. Mary Ellen opened the journal. They are magnificent. He watched her fingertips glide over the drawings, watched her eyes linger with admiration. Her delicate presence in the room seemed to soften the cold edges of his solitude, as though each breath she took infused new warmth into the walls. You were meant to create beauty, she whispered, and strength. Strength, Elias repeated, his gaze drifting to her abdomen. You speak of strength, yet you are the one carrying a fragile life inside you. You are the one recovering from pain no woman should endure. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a gesture filled with love and fear. I must protect my child, she said. It is the only part of me that has not been broken. Elias stepped closer, the air between them charged with something delicate and powerful. You are not broken. She looked up, meeting his eyes with a vulnerability that trembled inside her. Sometimes it feels that way. He took a breath as though fighting the urge to reach for her. His hand hovered for a heartbeat near her cheek, then withdrew, restrained by propriety and fear of overwhelming her. Mary Ellen, he murmured, you survived what others would not. That is not brokenness. That is strength forged in fire. Emotions swept through her like a warm tide. Her lips parted, but words failed her. Before either could speak again, a light knock sounded at the door. It was Samuel Carter, bowing with respectful urgency. Sir, there is news. Elias straightened, his expression shifting. Go on. Samuel hesitated. There are new rumors circulating among the Davenport circle. Mrs. Davenport suggests Mrs. Whitford may not be in Newport at all. Mary Ellen's breath stalled. Elias's voice hardened. On what basis? She claims she heard a woman's voice near the Burnham residence, Samuel replied. She says she has seen shadows that do not match the usual staff. Mary Ellen's fingers tightened around the journal. Elias dismissed Samuel with a nod, then turned to her. We will protect you. But she shook her head, trembling slightly. Elias, I did not wish to bring danger to your home. This is not your burden, he said softly. It is mine. I chose to help you, and I would choose it again. Her heart swelled with an emotion she dared not name. She closed the journal and set it carefully on the table. Across Fifth Avenue, the storm of whispers grew louder with each passing hour, and in the Whitford mansion, Charles had begun his own descent into wrath. In a dim back corridor, he met with a former servant, dismissed months earlier for discovering too much. The man, thin, nervous, and wringing his cap in trembling hands, leaned closer as Charles's cold voice pressed for answers. "Where would she go?" Charles asked, his tone deceptively calm. "I do not know, sir," the servant stammered. But she always looked out the window at the Burnham house. Sometimes she lingered there longer than necessary. Charles's expression darkened. "And you believe she might have gone to him?" "I cannot say for certain," the servant whispered, "but it is possible she fled to someone near." Charles leaned forward, rage simmering in every line of his face. "You will say nothing of this to anyone. Do you understand?" The servant nodded frantically. Charles slipped a coin into his hand. "Good. Now leave." When the man disappeared into the night, Charles stood alone in the corridor, the cold lantern light catching the sharp bones of his face. His breathing grew heavy. His hands curled into fists. He was losing control. Back in the Burnham mansion, Mary Ellen watched Elias as he moved toward the window, the faint light outlining his silhouette. He stood tall, silent, resolute, yet weighted by the ghosts of his past and the rising danger of his present. She took a tentative step toward him. "Elias," she said softly. He turned, and for a moment neither needed to speak. The fire crackled behind them, the snow drifted outside, and a fragile thread bound them in the quiet. Two wounded souls, two lives caught in the grip of winter and suspicion, two hearts beginning to warm beneath the cold shadow of fear. In that shared silence, the foundation of something profound took root, something neither had sought, yet neither could deny. And outside, the world sharpened its gaze, eager to tear apart what it did not understand. The snow had not stopped falling since dawn. It drifted in pale, whispering sheets across Fifth Avenue, clinging to the iron railings and muffling the sounds of passing carriages until the world appeared wrapped in a shroud of quiet. Inside the Burnham mansion, lamps burned softly against the grey morning light, illuminating hallways where shadows lingered like doubts that refused to fade. Mary Ellen stood before the mirror in the guest chamber, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the dressing table. Her reflection looked almost unfamiliar. The bruises had softened, their angry colors fading. The hollow look in her eyes had eased. Yet beneath the fragile improvement, a deeper turmoil churned. She was a guest in this house, sheltered, protected, cherished more than she dared admit. And yet, she feared she had brought danger to its threshold. That morning, Mrs. Holston had left a soft wool shawl folded on the bed. Pale grey, thick enough to shield her from the cold, it was meant for comfort. But to Mary Ellen, it suddenly appeared as something else. A disguise, a means to slip away unnoticed, a way to free Elias from any scandal she might cause. With trembling fingers, she draped the shawl around her shoulders, pulling the hood over her hair. She stared once more at her reflection. The shawl obscured her features, transforming her into a simple woman, indistinguishable from a maid leaving on an errand, a false anonymity that might grant her freedom or deliver her into peril. Her hand drifted instinctively toward her abdomen. The faint, fragile life within her pulsed like a whisper. She closed her eyes, overcome with a mix of fear and determination. If she stayed, she risked ruining Elias. If she left, she risked everything else. She opened the door quietly and stepped into the hallway. The mansion was unusually still. Samuel Carter had gone to speak with a delivery boy at the front entrance. Mrs. Holston busied herself in the kitchen. Elias, she assumed, was in his study, where he often spent the mornings reviewing correspondence and blueprints. Mary Ellen moved silently along the corridor, her footsteps absorbed by the thick carpets. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself resisted her departure. At the end of the corridor, she turned toward the servants' staircase, descending slowly, gripping the railing to keep her balance. Her breath trembled with every inhale. She reached the service entrance, the small side door that opened onto a narrow pathway between the mansion and an adjoining wall of hedges. The latch felt cold against her fingers. She hesitated. Her heart pounded. If she left this sanctuary, would she survive long enough to hide elsewhere? Would Charles's anger find her? Would she be forced to return to the man who had almost ended her life? A voice echoed faintly in her memory. Elias's voice. "You are not broken. You are stronger than you believe. Tears stung her eyes. I must protect you, she whispered to the empty air. Even if it means leaving. She pulled the door open. A gust of icy wind rushed inside, brushing her cheeks like a sharp warning. She stepped into the cold, tightening the shawl around her. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she made her way toward the side gate. Every breath formed a cloud of frost. The air bit at her skin. Samuel appeared suddenly behind her, emerging from the front courtyard with a basket in his hands. He froze, startled. "Mrs. Whitford," he whispered urgently. Mary Ellen raised a trembling hand. "Please, do not stop me. I cannot remain here. I will bring trouble to this household." Samuel's expression tightened with concern. "You should not be out in the cold, not in your condition." "I must go," she insisted. "Elias deserves peace, not entanglement in my misfortune." Samuel hesitated, but then slowly stepped aside, torn between loyalty to Elias and compassion for Mary Ellen. "If you are determined, then let me accompany you to the gate at least." She nodded gratefully. Together, they approached the narrow side gate, footsteps muffled by snow. The iron latch groaned softly as Samuel lifted it. Across the street, partially obscured by lampposts and swirling flakes, two men lingered in the cold, Charles's hired watchmen. They had been observing the block for days, noting every unusual movement. The moment the gate opened, one of them nudged his companion and pointed. "Look," he muttered, "there, by the Burnham side entrance." Through the curtain of snow, they saw only vague forms. A woman wrapped in a thick shawl. A manservant accompanying her, her height, her posture, even the delicate way she stepped onto the street. "It's her," the older man whispered. "It must be her." The shorter one squinted. "We cannot be sure." "I am," the older replied. "Whitford will want to know immediately." They retreated into the shadows before Mary Ellen could notice them, hurrying away to deliver their news. Mary Ellen stepped cautiously onto the narrow sidewalk. She paused, breathing deeply, the cold burning her lungs. A horse-drawn carriage rattled down the avenue, its lanterns swinging like a ghostly beacon. She took a step forward. "Mary Ellen!" His voice struck her like a physical force. She turned sharply. Elias Burnham strode down the pathway toward her, the wind catching his coat, his hair dusted with snow. His breath clouded the air, but his eyes, those deep grey eyes that had begun to feel like safety, burned with alarm. "What are you doing?" he demanded, though his tone trembled more with worry than anger. She pulled the shawl closer, fighting back tears. "I must leave, Elias. I cannot continue to endanger you. The rumors are spreading. You opened your home to me, and now people whisper your name with mine." He stopped just a few feet from her, blinking snowflakes away. "And you think leaving will silence them?" "Yes," she insisted. "I cannot take more from you than I already have." He stepped closer. "You have taken nothing." She shook her head. "I have pulled you into a danger that should not be yours. If Charles finds me here—" Elias's voice deepened, heavy with restrained emotion. "If he finds you anywhere, he will destroy you." Mary Ellen faltered. "Perhaps. But if you remain, he cut in, you live." Her breath hitched. "You cannot protect me forever," she whispered. "I can protect you now," he replied. "And now is all that matters." The intensity of his voice, the raw desperation beneath it, sent a shiver down her spine. Snow gathered softly on her shawl, on his coat, on the ground between them. A stillness enveloped them, pierced only by the wind's mournful sigh. "I do not want your life ruined," she said. "You have already suffered enough." Elias's jaw clenched. He looked at her as though the sight of her retreating form had torn something vital from him. "My life was ruined long before you came here," he said quietly. "You did not bring the shadows, Mary Ellen. You brought light." Her lips parted, fragile and trembling. He stepped forward until only a breath separated them. "Please," he murmured, "do not go." Silence fell between them, thick with tension, longing, fear, an emotional storm far louder than the wind. "Elias," she whispered, I cannot ask you to face the wrath of my husband. You did not ask, he replied evenly. I chose this. Her eyes glistened. Why? The answer lived in his gaze, in the way his breath faltered, in the way he fought every impulse to reach for her. But he spoke with restraint. Because your life matters, he said. Because your child matters, and because the thought of you walking away from here, alone, unprotected. He paused, his voice tight. It is unbearable. Her heart broke open. She turned away, unable to hold his gaze. I do not deserve your kindness, she whispered. His voice rose, roughened by emotion. Do not say that. Do not diminish yourself because of what he made you believe. She closed her eyes, tears spilling. I am afraid. So am I, he admitted, stepping closer. But fear is not a compass. It leads us only to the nearest darkness. Wind swept around them, swirling snow into fragile spirals. Mary Ellen breathed shakily. If I stay, he will come. If you leave, Elias said, he will find you, and you will face him alone. Is that what you want? Her lips trembled. No. Then stay, Elias whispered, at least until we decide the next step with clarity, not fear. Mary Ellen slowly turned to face him again. His expression was solemn, open, vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed before. The cold reddened his cheeks, but his eyes held only warmth, their gaze locked, long, unbroken, charged with an emotion neither dared name. A truth hovered between them. They had become entwined in ways neither intended. Their fates were no longer separate threads. To sever them now would leave both wounded. Finally, Mary Ellen nodded, her voice barely audible. Very well. I will stay. Relief washed across his features, not triumph, but profound gratitude. He extended his hand, not to claim her, but to guide her back. She placed her trembling fingers in his. Together they stepped back through the gate, leaving the biting wind behind. But high above the street, behind velvet curtains in the Davenport mansion, Lucille's sharp eyes tracked every movement with predatory precision. And from a shadowed alley farther down the block, Charles's hired men hurried away with news that would soon ignite a fire far more dangerous than any snowstorm. Inside the Burnham home, warm lamplight wrapped around Mary Ellen like a protective embrace. Yet the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the weight of what could have happened and the fragile salvation of what had not. She looked up at Elias and whispered, with trembling sincerity, "Thank you." He held her gaze with quiet depth. You never need thank me for keeping you safe. But the truth, already stirring like a fragile flame, was that safety alone was no longer what tied them together. And both of them, whether they admitted it or not, felt the shift. Winter tightened its grip on New York City with a merciless hand. Snow clung to rooftops and railings like a pale shroud. The wind rushing down Fifth Avenue in sharp bursts that sounded almost like warnings. The city's grandest boulevard, normally alive with carriages and glittering pedestrians, now felt tense, watchful, an elegant stage preparing for a confrontation no one yet fully understood. Inside the Burnham mansion, the atmosphere was warmer, yet no less heavy. The fireplaces were lit, their flames crackling with steady devotion, as though the house itself fought to preserve the fragile peace inside. In a quiet room on the second floor, Mary Ellen sat in a cushioned armchair beside the window, a knitted blanket draped over her legs. She pressed a hand over her abdomen, her eyes softening as she felt the faintest flutter within her, a tender reminder that life still held on despite the shadows surrounding her. Doctor. Warren had visited earlier that morning, his gloved fingers gentle as he examined her. Your strength is returning, he told her with cautious optimism, and the child responds well. Continue to rest. Avoid strain. And above all, avoid fear. His gaze had flicked unknowingly to Elias, who stood beside her like a silent guardian. Now, Mary Ellen sat watching the snow drift across the avenue, each flake swirling in patterns that danced between tranquility and chaos. Her thoughts drifted to her encounter on the street days earlier, her desperate attempt to spare Elias from scandal, and the fierce way he had stopped her, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and something else she dared not name. A soft knock broke her reverie. "May I come in?" Elias asked. His voice, deep, calm, threaded with restrained emotion, sent a tremor through her heart. She turned slightly in her chair, allowing him to enter. He stepped inside with measured grace, wearing a charcoal suit that contrasted beautifully with the pale winter light filtering through the curtains. His expression was composed, but his eyes revealed a storm of thoughts beneath the surface. "How are you this morning?" he asked. "Better," she replied softly. "Dr. Warren said the child is strong today." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That is good news." "It is more than good," she whispered. "It is hope." Elias nodded, but the warmth in his expression soon gave way to tension. He paced toward the window, resting one hand on the heavy velvet drape. "There is something I must tell you." Mary Ellen straightened, unease creeping through her chest. He turned to face her. "Charles has begun spreading a new lie. He claims you are unstable, that you are vulnerable to manipulation, that I have taken advantage of your delicate state." Her heart dropped. "He is trying to build a case," Elias continued quietly, "a case that you must be returned to him." Mary Ellen's voice trembled. He would truly say such things?" Elias's jaw tightened. "He has." She swallowed, fingers curling around the blanket's edge. "But why?" "Because he is losing control," Elias said, "and a man like Charles Whitford clings to power even tighter when it begins to slip." Mary Ellen pressed a hand to her chest. "He knows I am alive then. His spies saw you leaving the gate," Elias admitted, his voice low. "They did not see your face, but it was enough. He convinced himself you are here." Fear washed through her like icy water. She lowered her head. "I should not have left that day. I brought all of this to your doorstep." Elias stepped closer, kneeling beside her chair with unexpected tenderness. "Do not blame yourself. Charles's cruelty is the source of this storm, not you." Her lashes fluttered as she looked up at him, their faces so close she could feel the faint warmth of his breath. "He will come for me," she whispered. "Let him come," Elias said, voice deep and unwavering. "He will find me waiting." Their eyes held, charged with emotional lightning, until a knock at the door startled them apart. Mrs. Halston hesitated on the threshold, her expression troubled. "Sir, something has arrived," she said. Elias rose, smoothing his coat. "What is it, Agnes?" "A letter addressed to you. The seal is from the Whitford estate." Mary Ellen's breath caught. Elias's expression hardened. "Bring it." Mrs. Halston handed him the envelope with trembling hands. He broke the seal and unfolded the note, his eyes scanning its contents with growing disgust. "What does it say?" Mary Ellen asked. Elias lifted his head slowly. "He demands you be surrendered to him immediately. He claims you are ill, lost, unable to think clearly. And he warns that legal action will follow if you are not returned." Mary Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. "He twists everything." "He does worse," Elias said softly. "He believes the law will side with him, and if we do nothing, it may." She closed her eyes in despair. "What can we do?" For a moment, Elias said nothing. Then he crossed the room, his posture steady, his tone resolute. "We fight him." She stared at him, heart pounding. "Fight? I have spoken with people these past days," he explained. "Men who owed my family favors. Men who know Charles's reputation is not as pristine as he pretends. I have asked them discreet questions, and I have collected names." "Names?" she echoed. "Of those who have seen him lose his temper, of those who heard rumors of his gambling debts, of those dismissed for witnessing what they should not have." He looked at her with solemn purpose. "Your former servant, the one dismissed months ago, he has agreed to speak." Mary Ellen felt a mixture of shock and relief flood her chest. "You did this," she whispered. "For me, for justice," Elias replied, but his voice faltered ever so slightly. and because the truth must be brought to light. She rose slowly from the chair, bracing herself against the armrest. Elias, I cannot let you risk everything for me. He stepped toward her, stopping just before touching her. His voice lowered, rich with restrained passion. You are not asking me to risk it, he murmured. I am choosing to. Her breath trembled in her throat, but before she could respond, Samuel appeared at the doorway, his usually calm face etched with worry. Sir, he said, bowing. Charles Whitford was seen entering the municipal building this morning, in the company of 2 officials. Elias exchanged a grave look with Mary Ellen. He moves quickly, Elias murmured. He thinks he can wield influence like a weapon. Mary Ellen's knees weakened. Elias reached out instinctively, catching her elbow with gentle steadiness. You must sit, he urged. No, she whispered, clutching his arm. I need to know. What will he do? Elias held her hands, his palms warm against her trembling fingers. He will attempt to seek legal authority to reclaim you. He will claim you cannot make decisions for yourself. Mary Ellen felt nausea churn in her stomach. But Dr. Warren, I have already spoken with him, Elias said. He will testify that you are of clear mind, that your injuries were the result of violence inflicted upon you, not delusion. A tear slid down her cheek. And the servant? She asked. He will testify too, Elias said. He fears Charles, but he fears silence even more. She turned her face away, overwhelmed by the enormity of what Elias had done, how tirelessly he had moved behind the scenes, gathering truths, forging alliances, preparing to stand against a man whose wealth and influence intimidated nearly everyone in the city. Elias, she whispered, you should not shoulder this alone. He stepped closer, his voice soft yet powerful. I am not alone. Their gazes met, 2 hearts steeling themselves against the encroaching storm outside. For a moment the world seemed quiet, suspended in the silent throbbing of emotions, too deep and too dangerous to name. But outside the Burnham mansion, 5th Avenue had begun to churn. Rumors traveled faster than carriage wheels. Lucille Davenport's lavish parlor overflowed with gasping socialites as she retold her latest theory. How she believed Mary Ellen Whitford had taken refuge not by the sea, but in the home of the elusive Elias Burnham. Charles's anger ignited like fire beneath snow. His polished boots struck the pavement with rage as he exited the municipal building. His breath fogged the air like smoke from a burning fuse, his jaw set in determination. A storm was rising, one of lies, accusations, and the clashing wills of powerful men. And inside the Burnham mansion, Mary Ellen felt the first sharp gusts of that storm, shaking the fragile refuge that had sheltered her. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling a flutter of life, a reminder that she fought not only for herself. Elias watched her with quiet intensity. We will face him, he said, his voice steady, and we will not let him win. Mary Ellen met his gaze, and in that moment, even as the storm gathered strength, she felt something stronger than fear take root inside her. Courage. Not loud, not fiery, but steady, like the beating of a child's heart beneath her own. Snow drifted over 5th Avenue in thick, swirling layers, as if the heavens themselves sought to muffle the truths about to burst into the open. New York City glittered beneath the winter night, its grand mansions glowing with golden lamplight and opulence. The Davenport residence, adorned with towering firs and garlands woven with satin ribbons, hosted one of the most anticipated soirees of the season. Carriages lined the long street, their lanterns flickering like restless stars. Laughter floated through the air, laced with champagne and secrets. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers spilled light across swirling gowns of silk and velvet. Music from a quartet wove through conversations that had long ceased being innocent. Tonight, the city's elite hunted gossip, hungry for scandal, an indulgence they masked behind polite smiles and delicate fans. Lucille Davenport stood at the center of a cluster of guests, her emerald gown shimmering with every calculated movement. Her red hair, arranged in an extravagant updo, crowned her like a flame. She lifted her chin, savoring the attention as she leaned closer to her audience with the theatrical flair of someone who lived for intrigue. "I find it most curious," she murmured, her voice sweet as honey and sharp as glass, "that no one has received a letter from Mary Ellen Whitford directly. Only Charles speaks on her behalf." The ladies exchanged startled glances. Lucille continued, lowering her voice as though confiding a sacred secret. "And I could swear I heard a woman's voice coming from the Burnham house last week, a voice certainly not belonging to a servant." The room inhaled sharply. "That is impossible," a gentleman muttered, though his eyes sparkled with fascination. "Burnham lives like a recluse." "Precisely why it is remarkable," Lucille answered, her smile predatory. Across the ballroom, Charles Whitford overheard the rising whispers. Dressed in an immaculate black tailcoat with a silver waistcoat and diamond pin, he looked every inch the grieving husband, if one ignored the tightness around his mouth and the fire burning behind his eyes. He approached Lucille's circle with the grandiosity of a man stepping onto a stage. "You speak as though you know my wife better than I," he said, bowing slightly, "but allow me to enlighten you." The guests parted around him like waves before a ship. "My wife," Charles declared loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, "is unwell. Her mind has suffered a collapse. She is confused, fragile, and far too susceptible to manipulation." Gasps rippled through the room. "And I have reason to believe," he went on, relishing the attention, "that Elias Burnham has taken advantage of her delicate condition. He has abducted her to keep her under his influence, perhaps even to tarnish my name." The ballroom erupted into scandalized murmurs. Lucille pressed her hand to her chest with exaggerated shock. "Abducted? Surely not." "Surely yes," Charles insisted. "I demand an investigation. I will not rest until she is back in my care, where she belongs." The room thundered with gossip. Fans flicked open with urgency. Men whispered behind gloved hands. Ladies exchanged knowing glances. In that moment, Charles felt powerful again, the center of attention, the wronged husband, the man reclaiming control. But across Fifth Avenue, in a dimly lit room of the Burnham mansion, Mary Ellen lifted her head as Samuel recounted every word from a messenger who had slipped in through the back gate. She sat at Elias's writing desk, her tea gown the color of pale rose, her dark hair loosely braided. The fire crackled behind her, but her body remained still, her eyes fixed on Samuel as if absorbing every syllable of Charles's performance. "He accused Mr. Burnham of abducting you," Samuel said softly, "in front of dozens of people." Mary Ellen closed her eyes, the weight of that humiliation sinking into her bones. Charles was weaponizing her, again, using lies to shield his own sins, twisting her suffering to fit his narrative. Elias stood near the window, his silhouette rigid in the lamplight. Snow swirled violently outside, the storm gathering strength like a prophecy. "He will not stop," Elias said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "He will tarnish your name until the truth is smothered." Mary Ellen opened her eyes. "No," she said, "not this time." She rose from the chair, her movement steady despite the tremor of emotion coursing through her. Her hand drifted to her abdomen, not from fear, but from resolve. The small flutter beneath her palm gave her strength. "For years," she whispered, "I let him speak for me. I let him distort my thoughts, my choices, my identity. But I will not let him shape the story of my survival." Elias turned to her, his expression softening with admiration and concern. "What do you intend to do?" She met his gaze, her eyes burning with newfound determination. "I will tell the truth, all of it." Elias inhaled deeply. "Mary Ellen, I must," she insisted, clasping her hands together, "not only for myself, for my child. I will not begin this new life with lies hanging over me like chains." Samuel stepped closer. "What do you need, Mrs. Whitford?" Mary Ellen looked toward the writing desk, her voice steady. "Paper, ink, and the courage to write what I have been too afraid to admit, even to myself. Mrs. Holston, who had been lingering quietly at the doorway, entered the room with gentle reverence. She placed a fresh pot of ink, a quill, and several sheets of parchment on the table. Mary Ellen sat, drawing a deep breath. Her hand hovered over the quill. "Will this be enough?" she asked quietly. Elias moved behind her, though he kept a respectful distance, as though sensing she needed to stand alone in this moment. "It will be powerful," he said, "because it is your voice, your truth." She dipped the quill into the ink. The feather trembled slightly. Tears gathered in her eyes but did not fall. She began to write. Line after line flowed from her, steady and unstoppable. The abuse, the fear, the threats whispered in dark hallways, the bruises hidden beneath lace sleeves. The servants dismissed for witnessing too much. The coldness, the rage, the moment she realized her child might be in danger. Her script remained elegant, but her words struck with the force of a cry years withheld. At times, her hand shook. Samuel placed a comforting hand on the back of her chair. Mrs. Holston brought warm tea she barely tasted. Elias remained in the shadows, his presence steady, silent encouragement that wrapped around her like unseen arms. When she finished, her fingers were stained with ink and emotion. "This," she whispered, staring at the testament, "this is who he is." Elias stepped forward, his voice gentle. "This is who you are, brave." She handed the pages to Samuel. "Take this to Dr. Warren at once. Ask him to keep it safe. Share it only with those who can help us." Samuel bowed deeply. "I will protect it with my life." As he left through the back entrance, the wind howled violently, rattling the window panes. The storm outside matched the storm inside her chest, wild, fierce, unstoppable. Elias returned to Mary Ellen's side. "Now, it is our turn." She looked up at him, tears glistening like tiny crystals on her lashes. "What do you mean?" "I have coordinated with officials who owe my family loyalty," he said. "Men who have seen Charles attempt to manipulate the law for his own gain. They have agreed to intervene, quietly for now." "Intervene?" she echoed. "If Charles attempts to force his way into this home, he will not find us unprepared." A shiver traveled down her spine, not from fear, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Elias reached out slowly, carefully, and brushed his fingers against the back of her hand. The touch was gentle, fleeting, yet it ignited a warmth deep within her, a reassurance she had not felt in years. "We will face him together," he murmured. Mary Ellen's breath caught. "Elias!" He withdrew his hand, restraining the impulse to hold hers. "Rest, Mary Ellen. I will see to the preparations." She watched him leave the room, his broad shoulders tense beneath the fabric of his coat, his steps heavy with a responsibility he had chosen without hesitation. Snow hammered against the windows, muffling the world outside, turning the night into a storm of white. In the Burnham mansion, a fragile flame of resolve burned bright. In the Davenport mansion, scandal sharpened its knives. And in the Whitford mansion, Charles Whitford stared at the reflections in his gilded mirror, imagining himself victorious, never realizing the truth he had long buried was finally rising to destroy him. The storm outside raged on, but the storm within had only just begun. The morning broke with an eerie stillness, as though Fifth Avenue itself held its breath. Snow lay untouched across the wide boulevard, muffling the rumble of passing carriages and softening the edges of the grand mansions that lined the street. Inside the Burnham residence, the quiet was deceptive. Every room, every corridor, every flickering lamp seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if the house sensed the storm drawing nearer. Mary Ellen stood before the mirror in the room Elias had given her, fastening the delicate buttons of a pale blue morning gown that draped softly over her growing figure. Her hair lay in loose waves down her back, partially tamed by a simple ribbon. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. Something deeper stirred in her chest, the fragile but undeniable strength she had fought to recover. Outside her door, the house stirred with hushed preparation. Voices murmured, footsteps crossed floors, and Samuel's low, steady commands drifted down the hallway as he ensured every door and window was secured. Elias had not waited idly. He had ensured officials he trusted were close by. He had fortified the house, not with weapons, but with truth. Mary Ellen pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the soft flutter of life within her. "We face this today," she whispered to her child. "We face everything." As she stepped into the corridor, the boards creaked softly beneath her slippers. She felt the weight of the house settle around her, its warmth soothing, even as her heart pounded with dread. She descended toward the central hall, slowly, each step a quiet affirmation that she would not hide. Elias stood in the foyer, speaking in low tones to two uniformed officials who had arrived discreetly before dawn. He looked up as Mary Ellen approached the landing, his eyes softening with concern and something deeper, something he fought to contain for her sake. His expression was steady, but she sensed the storm inside him. "You should not exert yourself," he murmured when she reached the lower step. "I am not fragile," she replied gently. "Not anymore." Before he could respond, the front door exploded inward. A blast of freezing air tore through the hall, scattering snowflakes across the polished floor. Charles Whitford burst into the mansion like a tempest, his coat flaring behind him, his eyes wild with fury. His boots struck heavy against the marble, echoing like thunder as he strode forward. "Where is she?" he roared. "Where is my wife?" The officials stiffened, but Charles shoved past them as though they were mere shadows. He pointed an accusing finger at Elias. "You," he snarled, "you have hidden her from me, manipulated her, turned her against her rightful husband." Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between Charles and the staircase. His voice was calm, but his posture radiated strength. "You will speak with respect. You are not in your own house, Mr. Whitford." "My house?" Charles spat. "This house is nothing but a nest of deceit, and you—" He jabbed a finger at Elias's chest. "You have abducted my wife. I will have her returned to me this instant." Behind Elias, Mary Ellen took a slow, steady breath. The moment had come. She stepped onto the topmost step of the staircase. The sound of her footfall drew Charles's eyes upward when he saw her, pale but poised, trembling yet resolute. Something twisted in his expression, an ugly mix of triumph and fury. "Mary Ellen," he barked, "come here at once." His voice echoed violently through the hall, bouncing off the walls like a memory she prayed to forget. For an instant, she was swept back to the marble staircase of the Whitford mansion. The coldness of the stone beneath her as she fell, the terror, the crack of impact, the darkness that swallowed her. Her knees wavered, but then she saw Elias's face, steadfast, watchful, silently urging her onward, and she remembered the warmth of the Burnham home, the steady pulse of her child, the courage she had earned inch by inch. She lifted her chin. "No," she said. The single word struck Charles like a blow. He staggered forward, his face contorting with disbelief. "What did you say to me?" he demanded. Mary Ellen descended the staircase one measured step at a time, her hands lightly grazing the polished banister. The descent felt symbolic, deliberate, a reclaiming of the act that had nearly ended her. Each step echoed with defiance. "I said no," she repeated, her voice trembling but unmistakably clear. "I will not return to your home." Charles lunged forward, fury overtaking reason. But before he could reach the base of the staircase, Elias intercepted him, one arm braced against Charles's chest. "You will not touch her," Elias said. Charles growled, trying to push past him. "She is my wife." "And you nearly killed her," Elias replied, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Charles's eyes bulged with rage. "You think you can take her from me? She is unstable. She does not know what she says." Officials stepped forward, hands raised. "Mr. Whitford," one said warningly, "you need to remain calm." Calm, Charles thundered, while this vulture poisons my wife against me? Mary Ellen reached the last step. Her legs trembled, but she stood her ground. Her voice trembled only slightly as she addressed him. "You pushed me," she said. "You pushed me down our staircase. You endangered our child. You lied to everyone about my disappearance." His face twisted. "Lies," he hissed. "All lies. You are hysterical. You always have been." "I'm not hysterical," she whispered. Samuel entered then, a folded document in hand, the testament she had written with trembling determination. Dr. Warren stood beside him, his expression solemn. "We have statements," the magistrate announced, stepping forward, "and we will hear them now." Charles froze. "The doctor," the magistrate continued, "will read the written account in Mrs. Whitford's own words. Doctor." Warren unfolded the document with reverence. His voice, clear and steady, echoed through the hall as he read Mary Ellen's confession, every bruise, every threat, every instance of cruelty Charles had inflicted. Each word carved into the silence with devastating clarity. Charles turned red, then pale, then furious. Lies, all of them. She was confused. I protected her. She belongs with me. Mary Ellen stepped closer. "I belong to your control," she said softly. "I never belonged to your heart." Her words struck him with the force of a revelation he could not bear. The former Whitford servant stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "I saw the bruises," he said. "I heard the threats, and I was dismissed because I knew too much." One accusation after another piled upon Charles like snow on a collapsing roof. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice low but resonant. "Do you deny hiring men to watch this house? Do you deny bribing officials to declare your wife unstable?" Charles' face contorted. "She is mine." The magistrate raised a hand. "That is enough." He turned to the officials. "Arrest him." A stunned silence filled the hall as the officers stepped forward. Charles jerked backward, sputtering, roaring, but his struggles only made him look more unhinged. As they clasped irons around his wrists, he lunged one last time toward Mary Ellen, screaming her name with venom. Elias moved instantly, shielding her with his body. Charles's voice cracked. "This is not over," he spat. But the magistrate answered coldly, "It is." Charles was dragged through the open door, his shouts swallowed by the roaring winter wind. For a long moment the hall was silent. Mary Ellen's breath trembled. Her knees weakened. Elias turned toward her, worry flashing in his eyes. He reached for her, not forcefully, but with a tender urgency, his hands hovering until she nodded. Her fingers curled into his, seeking the warmth and reassurance she had earned. "It is over," he whispered. She closed her eyes, tears spilling freely. "No," she breathed. "It is finally beginning." Elias's expression softened, a storm of relief and emotion swirling within him. Outside, heavy snow continued to fall, cleansing, concealing, transforming Fifth Avenue into a world reborn. And for the first time since her fall, Mary Ellen felt weightless, not from frailty, but from freedom. Spring arrived in New York with a gentleness so unexpected that many mistook it for a dream. After the cruel winter that had gripped the city in silence and steel, the sudden warmth felt like a whispered promise sent by nature itself. Buds appeared timidly along the trees of Fifth Avenue, dots of green pushing through the last traces of frost, while carriage wheels splashed through thawing puddles that mirrored the pale, hopeful sky. Inside the Burnham mansion, the transformation of the season echoed a transformation far greater. Mary Ellen sat by the window of her room, the soft afternoon sun bathing her in warmth. A shawl of delicate cream wool lay draped around her shoulders, but she hardly needed it. In her arms slept her newborn child, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with gentle floral patterns. The baby's tiny breaths rose and fell against her chest, steady, sure, as if declaring to the world that he had chosen life, light, and hope. Her eyes glistened as she traced a fingertip along the child's cheek. She did not yet fully understand how her heart had survived the storms that had tried to break it, nor how she had found herself here, safe, loved, honored. But every moment spent holding her son made her believe that miracles could indeed rise from sorrow. A soft knock sounded behind her. "May I come in?" Elias's voice asked. She smiled softly. "Yes." He stepped into the room with quiet care, as though afraid to disturb the serenity settled over mother and child. He wore a light grey suit appropriate for the new season, the fabric catching the sunlight in a subtle sheen. His hair, now longer than it had been in winter, curled slightly at the ends, softening the strong line of his jaw. He approached slowly, his gaze drawn instantly to the infant sleeping peacefully in her arms. "He looks stronger today," Elias murmured. "He is," she replied, her voice tender. "Dr. Warren says he grows a little more each hour." "I do not doubt it," Elias said, his eyes warming. "He has inherited resilience." Mary Ellen lowered her gaze, a quiet flush blooming across her cheeks. "He has inherited life," she whispered. "That alone feels like grace." For a moment Elias said nothing. His silence was not cold or distant, it was reverent, as though he honored her strength with more than words could express. He slowly drew a chair closer and sat beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance while remaining near enough for the warmth between them to be felt. "Charles's trial has been set," Elias said gently. "The judge reviewed all the testimonies, the financial records, the accounts of his hired watchers, the statements from the servant. Even those who once feared him have stepped forward." Mary Ellen nodded, though she did not look away from her child. "And his influence?" "Gone," Elias answered, "stripped by his own actions. He cannot touch you, not legally, not socially, not ever again." A shiver ran through her, a mixture of relief, grief, and something like closure. She exhaled softly. "I never thought I would know this kind of peace." Elias watched her, his expression unreadable, yet full of emotion. "You earned it," he murmured. "Every breath of it." Silence enveloped them, but it was the warm kind, the kind that slowly tied two hearts together with invisible threads, the kind that held promise. After a long moment, Mary Ellen spoke again. "The magistrate sent word this morning. My legal separation is recognized. My freedom—" her voice cracked slightly. "My freedom is final." Elias's breath caught, though he hid it behind a careful shift of posture. "I am glad," he said, but the softness in his tone betrayed the depth of his emotion. She looked toward him then, really looked, taking in the man who had saved her life without ever claiming ownership over it. He had offered protection without expectation, kindness without condition, and in doing so, had become her refuge. "Elias," she said quietly, "I want to thank you again, for everything." He shook his head. "You owe me nothing." "I owe you my life," she insisted. "You owe me nothing," he repeated, his voice firm but gentle. "What I did because it was right, not because I hoped for gratitude." She studied him in the soft glow of the sunlight, noticing the faint shadows beneath his eyes, evidence of months of vigilance, nights spent ensuring her safety, emotions tightly contained beneath his calm exterior. Her breath trembled. "Will you hold him?" she asked suddenly. Elias blinked, startled. "Are you sure?" "He knows you," she said softly. "I want him to." Elias hesitated only a moment before nodding. She shifted carefully, placing the small bundle into his arms. He held the child with unexpected skill, his large hands cradling the tiny body as though holding the most precious thing in the world. The baby stirred, nestled closer, and resumed sleeping. Elias froze for a fraction of a second, overcome. Mary Ellen watched him with a tenderness she had long tried to suppress. Her heart tightened, not from pain, but from the slow, inexorable realization that her future might include more hope than she had ever dared to imagine. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You look at him as if he were your own." Elias lifted his gaze to hers, the raw emotion in his eyes unmistakable. But he did not claim anything, did not speak of dreams or desire. He simply whispered, "He is yours," and that alone makes him worthy of everything. A knot formed in her throat. She reached out without thinking, her hand brushing lightly against his. The touch was brief, delicate, but the connection it ignited was undeniable. Elias gently returned the child into her arms, lingering just long enough for his fingers to graze hers. The electricity of that fleeting contact pulsed through both of them. "I should go," he murmured, though his voice shook with restraint. "You need rest." "I do," she admitted softly. "But I also need your presence." He paused in the doorway, his hand closing around the frame as if anchoring himself. Slowly, he turned. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She drew a slow breath, her heart pounding beneath her gown. "I mean that I no longer want to face this world alone. Not now, not ever again." His eyes widened, hope striking through him like lightning. "Mary Ellen," he whispered, "I must tell you something. I have held it inside for months. I feared it. I fought it. But now that you are free, now that you are safe, I can no longer bury it." She rose from the chair, holding her child close, stepping toward him with delicate, trembling courage. "Tell me," she whispered. He exhaled, the words rising from a place deep within him. "I love you." The confession hung in the air like a sunrise, quiet, breathtaking, irrevocable. "I love you," he repeated, his voice steadying. "I do not presume. I do not expect. I only tell you because it is the truth of my heart." Her eyes filled with tears, her breath breaking. "Elias," she whispered, "I cannot imagine the future without you." He looked as though the world had stopped. She stepped closer. "You saved my life, but more than that, you saved the parts of me I thought were gone forever." He closed the distance between them slowly, reverently, his hand rising to hover near her cheek, waiting for permission. When she leaned gently into his touch, he let his fingertips graze her skin, soft, trembling, full of emotion. There was no urgency, no claim, only the profound connection of two souls who had walked through fire and chosen to heal together. A sound from the window drew their attention, the chirping of a small bird perched on the balcony rail. Winter had surrendered. Spring had come. Elias extended his hand. "Come with me." She placed her hand in his, and together they stepped onto the terrace, bathed in golden light. The city stretched before them, alive and growing, with blossoms beginning to open on every branch. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of peach and gold, the light warm upon their faces. Mary Ellen leaned lightly into Elias's side, their hands intertwined, her child nestled against her chest. "We survived," she whispered. "More than survived," Elias murmured. "We became." She looked up at him, truly looked, and saw not only the man who saved her, but the man who now stood beside her as an equal, a partner, a hope reborn. And as the sun climbed over Fifth Avenue, painting the world in the colors of a new beginning, Mary Ellen felt something she once believed she would never feel again. A future, a home, a love strong enough to defy an entire era. 5 years had passed since the winter that altered the course of Mary Ellen Whitford's life, and Fifth Avenue looked almost unrecognizable beneath the vibrant tapestry of early spring. The city had changed, subtly yet unmistakably. Mansions once shrouded in the whispers of scandal now echoed with the chatter of a new generation. The great trees lining the boulevard had grown fuller, their branches reaching confidently toward the sky, as if mirroring the transformation of the people who lived beneath them. Inside the Burnham residence, now a home warmed not only by love, but by the laughter of children, Mary Ellen stood near the tall parlor window, watching her oldest son run across the garden. He was 4 years old now, all freckles and boundless energy, his dark curls bouncing with each determined step. Behind him toddled a younger child, a daughter not yet steady on her feet, her little hands stretched toward her brother as if reaching for the world itself. Mary Ellen smiled softly. Her heart swelled each time she saw them. Children who had never known fear, who had entered a home built on gentleness, honesty, and the belief that love could be a refuge rather than a cage. Their joy was a testament to everything she and Elias had fought for. The parlor door opened quietly, and Elias stepped inside. He had changed in these 5 years, though the essence of him remained steady. Silver streaked his temples now, earned through nights of rocking infants and days spent guiding a steel empire reborn through integrity. His suits had softened in tone, more earth tones than the somber charcoal of his widowed years, but his presence remained warm and commanding. He approached Mary Ellen, wrapping his arms gently around her waist from behind, resting his chin lightly against her shoulder. She leaned into him without hesitation. The comfort between them had deepened, not faded with time. "They grow too fast," he murmured, watching their son chase a butterfly across the lawn. "They do," Mary Ellen replied. "And yet, I wish I had known such innocence at their age." Elias kissed her shoulder softly, a gesture full of reverence. "You gave them a different life. That is more than anyone else could have done." Outside, their son squealed with delight as the butterfly escaped into the sky. Their daughter plopped down on the grass, giggling with a sound that felt like sunlight made audible. "You know," Elias said gently, "Dr. Warren stopped by earlier. He wished to see them before leaving for Boston. He says he has never known children so eager for the world." Mary Ellen smiled. "Because they were born into hope." "Hope," he echoed, tightening his embrace, "and a mother made of courage." She closed her eyes briefly, emotion warming her chest. The years had softened many wounds, but occasionally she still felt the echoes of another staircase, another life. Elias's presence remained her anchor, steady and unyielding. "Has there been any news?" she asked quietly. He knew what she meant. "Yes," he said. "The trial concluded at last." Her breath slowed. Not with fear, those days were long gone, but with reflection. "Charles was sentenced," Elias continued. "Gambling, illegal dealings, and the accounts of violence. Society no longer protects men like him, not as it once did." Mary Ellen lowered her gaze. "And he will not leave prison," Elias said softly. "His health has deteriorated. It seems the weight of his choices found him even behind bars." She inhaled deeply, feeling no triumph, only a distant, inevitable sorrow. A life wasted. "Yes," Elias agreed, "but no longer yours." She turned slightly in his embrace, resting her hand against his chest. "Sometimes I wonder if society learned anything from our struggle." "It has," Elias said. "Not everything, but enough to make a difference." "Enough?" He nodded. "Laws are shifting, quietly. Judges listen more carefully now when women speak of violence. Newspapers no longer treat such matters as whispers of hysteria. It is not perfect, but the world is learning." A soft knock sounded at the doorframe. Samuel stood there, aged with grace, his once dark hair streaked with silver. He had remained a loyal presence in their lives, becoming something of a beloved uncle to the children. "Beg pardon," he said warmly, "but the little ones are attempting to climb the fountain." Elias sighed, laughing under his breath. "Again?" Mary Ellen chuckled. "I'll go." But before she moved, Samuel approached her with a small, respectful bow. "Mrs. Burnham, you should know something. Your old testimony, it has helped many women these past 5 years. Dr. Warren says your case changed the way local courts handle domestic violence. They reference it often." She blinked, stunned. They use my name?" "With honor," Samuel replied. "With respect." Mary Ellen touched her heart, overwhelmed. After Samuel left, she turned to Elias. "I never imagined my suffering would become something that could help others." Elias cupped her cheek with infinite tenderness. "You did not survive in vain. Your truth changed more than your own destiny." She covered his hand with hers. And you gave me a chance to speak that truth. He breathed deeply, emotion shimmering in his eyes. You gave yourself that chance. I merely stood beside you. Their children's laughter echoed louder through the open window, pulling them back into the warmth of the present. Shall we? Elias asked. Mary Ellen nodded, and together they walked to the terrace, now adorned with potted flowers and climbing vines that had grown across the stone columns. The air hummed with the scent of blooming lilacs. Fifth Avenue lay before them just as it had 5 years earlier, yet everything had transformed. Their son spotted them and rushed forward, his little arms swinging wildly. Mama! Papa! Come see the blossoms! His voice rang with pure excitement. Elias lifted him with effortless strength, spinning him in a gentle circle until the boy squealed. Their daughter toddled up, stretching her arms to be held. Mary Ellen picked her up, pressing a kiss to her soft cheek. As the four of them stood together on the terrace, surrounded by spring light, by life, by the undeniable resilience of rebuilt hearts, Mary Ellen felt something deep within her settle at last. Peace. Not the fragile peace of merely surviving, but the profound peace of having chosen her future, her family, her love. She leaned her head against Elias's shoulder, watching their children point toward the trees where blossoms had begun to open like tiny promises. 5 years ago, she whispered, I thought my life was ending. Elias kissed the top of her head. 5 years ago, your life was beginning. She closed her eyes, breathing in the sweetness of the moment. Do you ever fear the future? She asked softly. Elias wrapped one arm around her, holding their son with the other. Not with you beside me. She smiled, a smile filled with quiet triumph. Nor I. And as the sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and rose, Mary Ellen knew one truth with absolute certainty. Love, not the kind that scars, but the kind that heals, had endured the storms, survived the winters, and blossomed into something stronger than time. Something worthy of the family standing together on that terrace, something that would light their path for every season still to come. Every story leaves a mark, but some remind us that the human heart, no matter how bruised, no matter how underestimated, can rise again with a strength that defies every expectation. Mary Ellen's journey is not only a tale of love and survival, but a reminder that reclaiming one's voice is the first step toward reclaiming one's destiny. Her courage teaches us that healing is possible, that justice can prevail, and that even the deepest wounds can bloom into new beginnings when compassion and truth walk beside us. If this story touched you in any way, if it moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in the quiet power of hope, tell me in the comments what resonated with you the most. And if you made it all the way to the end, write the word reborn, so I'll know you were here, heart and soul, until the last page. If you wish to support the team that brings these historical romances to life, your kindness means the world. You can send a super thanks in any amount that feels right for you. It helps us continue creating stories that honor resilience, love, and emotional depth. And if supporting financially isn't possible at the moment, sharing this story with someone who might love it is another beautiful way to help our channel grow. Don't forget to watch the other narrations I'm leaving for you in the cards. They're filled with drama, passion, and unforgettable characters just like Mary Ellen and Elias. Thank you for being here. May their journey stay with you long after the final words fade.